Welcome back, and we are moving into our second conversation for today as we find out more about restoration work taking place or that you're working towards at the historic St Johns Cathedral. We have with us on set Bishop Phillip Wright, who is a representative of the Anglican Diocese of Belize, and also Reverend Lloyd Taylor. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, Marlene and Simon. Good to be here, as always.
Yes. So, this is a historic building for the country, not just for the Anglican Diocese. And I want to start there, talking a bit about what it represents for you as Anglicans, but also for the wider community as well.
Well, I think the way you put it, Marlene, is exactly what we understand it to be. It's really for all Belizeans, and Anglicans are in some ways merely the custodians of this historic and iconic building. I mean, I look at some of the tourist promotional stuff, just about every one of them, even if it's for a fleeting moment, flashes an image of St. John's Cathedral. It's a draw for many of the tourists who come to our shores. But even beyond that, historically, I think the truth be told, the history of this country cannot be told without mention of that brick building down at the end of Albert Street. You know, it for good or bad and everything in between, it has been there throughout the settled
200 years.
Yeah, the settled history of this place we call Belize.
It has actually become one of the main tourist attractions for people, especially cruise ship passengers who are doing day tours.
Precisely.
If you pass there, you will see many tourists in and out, taking photographs. Tell us about how you strike the right balance with that it doesn't just become sightseeing. I mean, it still functions today as your church.
Precisely. Well, it's an interesting question, and I know Father Taylor can add to that as well.
Well, they come in while we are still doing services. Many of them would join our services. Others will come in quietly and take photographs and so on. And we do have people on site sometimes who direct them and give them materials which tell about the work and function of a church.
Let's go back a bit, because for some reason or the other, I think perhaps it is lost on many Belizeans the historic importance of this cathedral. And I say that from a broad perspective, that it doesn't matter if you're Roman Catholic, you're Muslim, or any other religion. This particular building and the movement has a certain historical role that is perhaps being overlooked today by our present generation. Take us back a bit to some of the historic events that may have happened there that concreted its place in our history.
Well, probably too many to mention, but for instance, I would start off by saying, when you read the history, and certainly when the settlement moved from St. George's Key to Belize Tongues, today's Belize City, and they started to erect, of course, a residence for the governor and what we now have as the Supreme Court and the Magistrates Court. It is clear that the decision to construct the cathedral was a significant moment in that historical development. It's sort of like the early settlers said, now that we're here, we need a place of worship. A recognized place of worship. And I say that too because some years ago we had a brick expert that came and visited and toured the cathedral and was looking at the bricks and so on. And you know, history used to say that the bricks came across in ships as ballast.
It used to balance the boat.
And they made it sound, however, as if these were kind of rejected bricks that were just piled on a ship and dumped on the course to load up the mahogany and the logwood. But this guy looked at the bricks and he said, no, these are sort of customized bricks, which meant that they were ordered. So it speaks to a more intentional nature to it. So that's the very start of the building, suggests that the minds of those early settlers is, we are here now, you know, and we want a place of worship, like back in Old England. But people know of the crowning of the Mosquito Coast kings. They came across here. They were a British colony, or people under British rule. They wanted their king to be crowned in a cathedral like the one in England. And so this place became the only other cathedral other than Westminster in the UK where a king or a royalty was crowned.
There was a coronation.
Coronation actually took place, and we have records of the ceremony that took place. A fantastic thing. When emancipation came in the 1830s and so on, there is evidence that a sort of special service was held in this building. I would have loved to have witnessed that, and I still am searching to hear the sermon that Matthew Newport preached on that day. You know, now that you know, and throughout the rest of history, there have been major moments. You could point to maybe when the Queen visited and had a chance to tour the building, and other national and significant events somehow were linked to this place. Not to mention the many funerals, sometimes of dignitaries and others that took place there. The baptisms of slaves after they had sort of won their freedom. We may have mixed reviews about those days, but the fact is you could see a progress towards today, where the descendants of slaves, if you will, are now in charge of the place, you know. So
And they built it.
And they built it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
The
one
entire area, though, is historic, and I think oftentimes we fail to see that. The Governor's House, which is across the street, which is now the House of Culture, and the Yabra Cemetery as well.
all part of that, you're right. If I may tell a quick anecdotal
Of course.
story, I remember reading, and at times the chaplain to the settlement and the governor, church and state, you know, they don't always get along, you know. And one day there was this particular chaplain that was known to be a bit troublesome, and there was a funeral in the Yarborough Cemetery, and apparently he refused to have the body be put down because the family didn't pay. And so there was a bit of a commotion. The governor was standing on his west veranda overlooking all of this, saw the commotion, sent somebody to find out what is going on out there. They came back and said, well, the priest from over there refuses to bury this book. And the governor sent an instruction, tell him, bury him. And so the person returned. He buried him, but he said, tell the governor this, he won't be here much longer. And apparently he wrote the crown, and a few months later that governor was removed. So
Wow.
you have these maybe somewhat anecdotal stories, but they paint also a picture of the times. No?
Yeah.
And you're right. Today
And the proximity.
and the proximity. Church service couldn't start until the governor came across. After all, he was the representative of the Queen, and there's a seat in there, now occupied by the Governor General. Only he can sit in there. The governor used to sit there. So there are all these little things that paint an interesting portrait, if you will, of a period in our history as well.
Which brings us to the restoration work now, in terms of being able to maintain and preserve the history of this cathedral. Can you speak to us on that?
Precisely. And I mean, Father Taylor, again, is head of the committee with several others. But you're right, we are trying to recapture what might have been part of that original look. But not just for the looks, but to kind of reestablish a presence, to say that this building has served this community for a long time, and it wants to continue, it wants to renew that.
So it's more than just about the aesthetic value of it.
Precisely.
But the aesthetics is beautiful.
Well,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
that is
You can't
important
beat
too,
it. You can't beat that, yeah.
because we find that the building was deteriorating. We need to point the bricks so that the pointing is to put back the plaster so the bricks don't fall off. And to repaint and make the place look good and attractive, not only for tourists but also for our own members and the Belizean public.
For those who've never visited, there are quite a number of unique aspects of the cathedral. And, you know, feels like many years ago, but a couple years ago, we did a broadcast from the cathedral, and we were able to really find out more about some of the details, the stained glass, the mahogany fixtures, and I believe there was another wood that was used as well. And the organ, that's what I wanted to get at as well. Tell us more about that.
Okay, Bishop.
Well, the organ is a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
Because, and you might be surprised as to why, nowadays there is a fancy electronic organ.
A Yamaha keyboard.
Not a Yamaha keyboard anymore.
Bishop was quick to correct you on that one.
It costs us too much to call that a Yamaha keyboard. But yes, set in this historic frame of the pipes is a modern, very modern organ. But it was I think it was a good decision by
It still sounds like the pipe organ?
We think so.
Okay.
But we kept that look.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I hear too many tour guides say there is a pipe organ up there. There's not a pipe organ. But we maintain the look because it is part of that sort of nostalgic thing there. And there are, however, many stories, and one who comes to mind is Mr. Farber, who has passed on. But as a boy, he would tell stories of having to do the sort of
pumping
in order that this. But just imagine in those days to have the sound of an organ in this tiny little town. So it's part of the draw, you know. It's part of the draw. Yeah. So
there
it
we
is.
go. See.
Yeah.
Still looks like it.
It's still, if nothing else, it still looks like it.
So the tour guides get away with that little
I think they
outfit.
can.
In a church too.
In a church, yeah. It's been fascinating to hear some of the stories, because what is also interesting is in this ancient building are some rather modern fixtures now. I mean, the pulpit from which we preach is only about 10 years old, you know.
Yeah.
And a number of other things, but you know, a lesson for life. You know, if you hang out in an ancient place, you become as ancient as the place. And so all these
or
things.
you can be upgraded like the pipe organ.
Well,
you
you
know?
can, yes, and still have the look.
And that's what we want to do in the church. We want to keep the historic side, but we also have to move into the 21st century. And one of the things we are going to try to do, in fact we have started, is to not only make it a tourist destination, but to develop a tourist business around the church so that it will be able to maintain itself eventually.
Yeah.
In terms of
what was it? That feels like a metaphor of the church itself.
Well,
restoring and progressing.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what we are doing.
Do you charge for your tours currently?
That's the point. We don't, you know. So, folks come in, they tour. We have a box, a gift box. But what Father Taylor is getting at is we want to change that, where we will give the guided tour once you come to the door. So the tour guide will bring folks, and
you take over,
and we'll take over. And I think there are plans to have an entry fee.
Yeah.
But with that, you may get a little souvenir bag that has a little, you know, leaflet on the history and maybe a little key ring or something of the cathedral. We're trying to produce videos and so forth.
And develop a real tourist center, a service where people can come, and not only for the foreigners, but for the locals, because they will be producing many of the artifacts that we will be selling.
In terms of the overall restoration, is there buy-in from the community at large? I ask because St. Johns Cathedral is one of the go-to places for ecumenical services. Whenever there's the ceremonial opening of the Supreme Court, for instance, its proximity to the downtown area and the court building, and the fact that it's readily available to persons who want to worship there. The bar and the bench both use Anglican Cathedral. Whenever there's a government perhaps celebration where people come in, this is the place they go to. Do you find that there also is buy-in from them in terms of either assisting with funds to get this work done?
Not enough. And I think that is the campaign that is going on as well. We are reaching out to the business community, to individuals, and the response is improving, you know. But I think today is part of letting people say, hey, this is our cathedral in many ways, and giving to it is given to a national monument, really.
Let me follow up, because that was one of the things I wanted to ask. There's been quite a number of funds spent on what's called a downtown rejuvenation project, and it is in keeping in mind of developing a better tourist product for Belize City. Have you benefited from this project?
We have.
Okay.
In fact, this first phase, most of the money for this first phase has come from that fund.
That is very good to know.
Yes, we received quite a bit from it. In fact, not the money. All the labor that is being done is provided by this fund at this point.
Yeah. Because it is a part, and as I've said several times, and it's not to diminish the worth of the cathedral as a religious institution, but the history that it holds and the appeal that it has for persons who are visited. They're very limited activities, and people always want that photo of something iconic, and that's what the Anglican Cathedral is for many who pass through Belize City.
That is true, and
I do think you need to charge the tourists who are coming in.
No, really, we are really going to develop this tourist business, and we are going to have our own tourist guide, and we are going to train them so that they'll have the right information to give to the tourist. Besides this, we'd want to appeal to Belizeans who have benefited, and most of us have benefited from the cathedral through education, through attendance in church, through baptisms, through burials and weddings, to give whatever little they can to assist us in bringing back this building to its magnificence. Not only the physical side of it, but also the spiritual side of it, because we will be able to serve more and more people and to serve them satisfactorily in the future as we have done in the past.
What is the estimate that the restoration work will cost?
We don't have
we
don't have an estimate, because it's such that you may estimate a certain cost, and we're discovering that as they touch the building, things that we did not see are being shown up now. And so we will just have to collect the money as much as we can, and then put it in as we go. I think it costs over $1 million to restore that building.
We've seen some photos of the window fixtures that have eroded with time, deteriorated with time.
Right.
What would you say are some of the more urgent areas that have to be addressed?
I would say the windows are one. We are addressing the roof because we had leakages. And the third thing would be the pointing of the building, the bricks, to keep the building intact.
So it's replastering the entire
Yes.
cathedral.
Yes.
And what is unique, again, by the experts, the foundation upon which this thing stands is kind of unique. It's what I think they call a floating foundation. No piles were driven. There's a story told by the same Mr. Farber after the '61 hurricane or so, when it once had a wooden floor, and that was all ripped out. And what they saw underneath were huge mahogany logs and so on that were placed crisscross, sort of. And that's what this unique building stands on. And it is sinking a bit. You can see evidence that. So just the fact that it has stood for 200 years through all the big storms and hurricanes is perhaps a testimony to God's grace, among other things, as to as to how important this building has been.
And it was well constructed.
Yeah.
And it was well constructed, yeah.
So currently, you're receiving some assistance from NICH through the Downtown Rejuvenation
Right.
Project. You are making a public appeal, I'm hearing from that as well.
Precisely.
Yes.
And you are also going to be phasing in the development of your tourist product.
Yes.
Exactly.
How do people support so that you can get started on the work that you have in mind?
Well, we do have an account that we have opened just for this, and I can see that account is opened at Atlantic Bank. The number is 100295333. Anyone can
Make a deposit
make
there.
a deposit there.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how have you been? How have the parishioners been involved in helping to raise funds?
Well, I get Father is on top of it, but I
Yeah.
know they've drawn Bishop in, you know, and I've visited some members of the church.
Yeah.
Today we're going to visit some more. I think the appeal is even among just the members
Yeah.
themselves to give. Look for fundraisers and other things
Yeah.
going on. I don't know if you remember the days, it has slowed down a bit, but we used to have this International Food Fest
Yes.
in the month of September. It was all part. So those are some of the other ways in which I
Yeah.
think they are. But talk about members, they are very involved
Yeah.
in the process.
Well, the food fest is still going on. It's just changed a little. And on September 14th, we'll be having a dinner dance, and some of those funds will be going to this project. And we are not charging much for the dinner dance. It's only $100 per person.
Yeah.
We look to see both of you there.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a contribution. That's
It's
what
a
it is
contribution
towards the
right,
work.
Right.
Excellent. And phasing in your, have you had any objections, any challenges in phasing in the charge for your tour?
We don't know yet because we haven't actually.
You have to meet with BTB
Yeah,
and
I
get
think
that
the process
sorted.
is going on now as
Yes.
well.
What we are doing, we have already made an application
Okay.
for a tourist business.
Okay.
And that part of the business will be operated just like any other tourist business. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
we'll have to get our license and permits and all those sort
Yeah.
of things.
Excellent. Well, we do hope that you're able to get that sorted because that would be helpful in the maintenance even after all the restoration work would be completed.
That's what we're looking forward
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. All right.
And there will be I'm sure Father notified me that there will be a day when we'll have a big service of sorts to mark the end of these early phases. And certainly we'll let you know, and you might
Yeah.
want to do a feature
Yeah.
Around that time.
We'll be
We
happy to have
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you so much for coming in once again, and we'll get that account number posted as well. We know a number of people from the diaspora have passed through, whether it's Anglican schools or have benefited from the work there, and they'd perhaps like to contribute as well. And we really wish you the best of luck. As I said in the very beginning, and I can restate now, it is a very important institution for the Anglican Diocese, but also for the broader community as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, diaspora, we don't have any restrictions, and unlike the earlier conversation we had, all monies are welcome.
All right, thank you so much. Bishop, thank you very much, Reverend.
Thank you for
You're
having
welcome.
us.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Master Drummer Emmett Young, so stay tuned.